Hello, and welcome to our series Curated Conversations. I'm Claire Howard, the Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at the Blanton. And tonight I'm thrilled to be joined by Austin-based photographers Cindy Elizabeth, Moyo Oyalola, and Riley Reed for a panel discussion titled Black is Beautiful in the Instagram Age. This topic is inspired by our current exhibition, Black is Beautiful, the photography of Kwame Brathwaite, specifically Brathwaite's idea that imagery and representation can drive social change. Working in the 1960s, Brathwaite didn't have access to Instagram, but that medium's accessibility has offered a platform to a new generation of photographers who meld art and activism. So tonight, Cindy, Moyo, and Riley will be discussing their practices, their activism, and how social media fits into both. Just a few notes before we get started. Your audio is muted, so no one can hear you, and only the panelists are visible on the screen. We'll be taking your Q&As from the Q&A window, or your questions from the Q&A window. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, including one labeled Q&A. Click on that to type and send your questions to us, and feel free to send your questions throughout the conversation, and we'll do our best to circle back to them at the end. We'll also be dropping a donation link into the chat box, so feel free to use that if you enjoy the program. To start, I'll give a brief overview of the Brathwaite exhibition and its themes for those of you who haven't made it in to see it yet, just to give you some context for our discussion tonight. All right. So this is the first exhibition to examine the work of Kwame Brathwaite, who you see on the left in a self-portrait from around 1964. The exhibition is organized by the Aperture Foundation and by Kwame S. Brathwaite, the photographer's son and the director of the Kwame Brathwaite Archive. Brathwaite was born in 1938 in Brooklyn to parents who were immigrants from Barbados. He grew up in the Bronx. And his political consciousness was really shaped early on when he and his brother Alombe saw the photographs of the murdered Emmett Till in his casket that were published in Jet magazine. And it was kind of seeing the galvanic effect of that photograph that made Brathwaite and his brother realize that images had a tremendous ability to drive social change. They were also shaped by the teachings of Marcus Garvey, an early 20th century political philosopher whose ideas centered on Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. So we see this political consciousness throughout the show, especially in the Black is Beautiful era work. That's really kind of the focus of this exhibition. But Brathwaite went on to have a very long career throughout the 70s and 80s beyond kind of the scope of this exhibition. So from the very start, we see Brathwaite melding art and activism in his work and really thinking about how art and creativity could marry with community and foster community and benefit community. So right out of high school, Kwame and Alombe, his brother, and some friends founded the African Jazz Art Society and Studios in Harlem. And you see them on the left. Those are the founding members of AJazz, as it was called, and they began organizing jazz shows throughout Harlem and the South Bronx. And their idea was really to bring the jazz scene back uptown to where it had originated. And so this is really where Brathwaite began photographing, was in these jazz clubs, and it required him to really hone his technical skills because he was shooting in low light. The subjects that he was photographing were in movement, they were performing, so he really had to train himself to capture kind of the perfect moment in his photographs. So here we see Max Roach, the famous jazz drummer, on the left, and Brathwaite has caught him at a perfect moment where he's perfectly still and in focus, and just his drumstick is kind of blurred and gives you a sense of kind of the motion and the music that's happening. Similarly with Max Roach's spouse Abby Lincoln there on the right singing, you really get the sense of her just kind of belting out this note. It's almost as if you're there. So this is where Brathwaite really develops his photographic skills, but from the start, we also see a level of political consciousness among Brathwaite and his circle in calling themselves specifically the African Jazz Art Society and Studios and asserting that connection back to the continent. The second part of the exhibition is titled Think Black, Buy Black, and this is where we see the philosophy of Marcus Garvey really coming through for Brathwaite and his circle, and kind of the second wave of neo-Garveyites who were active in Harlem at the same time. So on the left, you see Brathwaite's sister-in-law, the Grandassa model Namsa Brath, at a protest against a store called Wigs Parisian that moved into Harlem. It was a white-owned wig shop that sold straight-haired wigs to Black women, and Namsa is protesting against kind of the European beauty standards that those straight-haired wigs were fostering. And in contrast, on the right, you see the Fly Shop, which is a locally owned business, and you get a sense of kind of what a center or hub for the community it was in the community message board that's kind of posted on the left that has, if you see it in the show, there's all kinds of little flyers posted for different events, including the Naturally fashion shows that Brathwaite and Ajaz would put on every year. So Garvey's philosophy really emphasized economic independence for Black communities and the idea that to achieve empowerment, Black communities needed to keep their dollars circulating within the community. So you see Buy Black posted here in the front door of the African market, and on the left you see attendees at a Marcus Garvey Day parade, which is a major community event that comes up again and again. We'll see it later in Brathwaite's photographs. And the second part of this is thinking Black. So not just buying Black, but thinking Black and kind of expressing your consciousness and your awareness of your African heritage through your dress and the way that you kind of, outfit your surroundings even. So you see Jimmy Abu on the left in Kwame Olombe's apartment. And not only is he wearing kind of African clothing, they also have an African mask, statues. You see the models on the right posing with some African art while wearing African-inspired fashions. So it's really also the way that you kind of, express your identity as you move through the world. And so the majority of the show, the last section and kind of the biggest section is the Grandassa Models, which was a collective of local women. They weren't professional models. They were women from the community that joined together to create a modeling agency that would promote natural beauty standards and autonomous beauty standards for Black women that were independent of kind of the pale and frail Twiggy or Jean Shrimpton mode that you might see in Vogue or kind of the dominant fashion magazines of the day. So you get a sense in the photograph on the left of the range of body types, skin tones that were represented by the Grandassa models, but you notice all of them are wearing their hair naturally. They're not wearing wigs, they're not straightening it. That was kind of central to their mission, was to promote an appreciation of the natural beauty of Black women. They put on events called Naturally that were sort of a beauty pageant, but more than that, kind of a community event. There would be music, Max Roach and Abby Lincoln would perform, there were speakers, and the Grandassa models would stage a fashion show wearing African-inspired fashions that they had made for themselves. So here again, we see Namsa Brath. And these are two of a series of large-scale color photographs that close the show. They're the latest images in the exhibition. On the left, you see Sokolo Brathwaite wearing a headpiece designed by Carolee Prince. This is Kwame's wife, Sokolo, and Carolee Prince designed these beautiful beaded headdresses, very inspired by African designs, for Diana Ross, as well as the Grandassa models. And on the right, you see model and actress Radia Fry, modeling her natural hairstyle, kind of a beaded and feathered necklace. And these are kind of two of my very favorite images in the show. And these are kind of studio portraits, but I think it's also really important that the exhibition includes images of the Grandassa models out and about in the community. So you see them participating in a fashion show, in a parade for Garvey Day, or this great image of a model kind of perched on the hood of a car during a Garvey Day celebration. So, I'll kind of just close with a little teaser. If you come to see the show, here's a little installation shot that I took. So that's an overview of the show. And now I will introduce our first speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Riley Reed. Riley is a socially conscious storyteller, photographer, writer, and the founder of Woke Beauty, a creative studio, photography movement, and self-actualization tool that celebrates the inherent resilience of women everywhere. Her projects as a writer and photographer have been featured in publications like NPR's StoryCorps, Forbes, Camille Styles, and Tribeza. As a creative, she has worked with brands like Gap, Google, Whole Foods, and Dove to create everything from social media campaigns to editorial spreads and life-size exhibitions. She proudly serves as a global shaper with the World Economic Forum, sits on the board of the Fresh Chefs Society, and collaborates with nonprofit organizations to foster spaces that value creative insurgence, equity, and inclusion. So Riley's going to speak a little bit with us about her work, and then we'll keep going. So take it away, Riley.
Hi, everyone. I would say it's lovely to see you, but unfortunately I can't. So I'm imagining all of you in my mind. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I'm so honored to be speaking alongside two other incredible artists who I admire very much in the community. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, first of all, my voice is in and out. So if I take a breath, that is why. It's also just really important to breathe, but just a little heads up there. So I studied fine art at the University of Virginia. I used to shoot only black and white, actually, in all medium format until, of course, I graduated and things took a turn. Now my work is predominantly digital and almost all in color. And so it's been really interesting to kind of navigate the evolution of my art. There's a really interesting intersection between what I do in front of and behind the lens, and then what I do with women in my business and movement, Woke Beauty. And I'll talk about that in just a bit. I've lived in Austin for about 5 years now. I grew up all over the world. I come from a professional sports background. So I've lived in 6 cities and 6 countries and 15 cities, and it's been quite a whirlwind, but I do love Austin, and though I think home is where the people are, I feel like home here, which has been really nourishing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start talking a little bit about my work. Bear with me. Okay, so I'm going to show you first my self-portraiture and then kind of move into more of the work that I do with Woke Beauty. And I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible. I can get verbose, so I will do my best. But my work as in sort of self-portraiture, just to give you a little background, the series is called Manifest. And I started this series a couple of years ago, and everything is shot here in Austin. There was a desire and a push to show Austin as this atmosphere, as this environment where Black women could thrive, where we could claim space despite the city's sort of movement to push us out, right? Despite redlining historically, despite gentrification. And with all of that said, also just despite kind of little covert nuances that you can't really see kind of like obviously, but that exists just beneath the surface. So just a couple of paragraphs from my artist statement to give you a little bit of background. With the use of grandiose compositions, hopeful expressions, and dynamic gestures, I am actively claiming space, redefining the self-portrait, and taking ownership over the lens by embodying delicate power, even in the face of adversity and vulnerability. The images are intentionally rich in color to surround caramel skin with hope and positivity. In these compositions, I am maximizing few resources, minimal clothing, public spaces, myself as the photographer, myself as the subject, to make a point that women of color don't need abundance to make an atmosphere appear beautiful. We are the producers. Through this cause, I am sacrificing my ego and exposing myself to critique in an effort to make a statement. These images are not me as a model, an actress, nor a self-serving subject. I am simply a vehicle to facilitate the movement, like an Olympic torchbearer carrying and eventually passing the torch to the next person, progressing humanity to a higher order. This body of work serves as a template for American cities whose marginalized individuals are being displaced, as a call to action for justice, equity, and reform. Manifest is a tribute to all women of color, present and past, yearning to belong. One of my favorite quotes by Saidiya Hartman, and I really gather a lot of my inspiration from her, she wrote, "Wayward lives, beautiful experiments," is beauty is not a luxury, rather it is a way of creating possibility in the space of enclosure, a radical set of subsistence and embrace of our terribleness, a transfiguration of the given. And I love that quote because I do think it speaks to this act of rebellion, but in a way that is beautiful, in a way that is joyous. And I think that's really important for us as artists to embody. And so that is manifest. Last summer during quarantine, I also shot a series inside that spoke to architecture and kind of breaking free from walls and confinements. And that was what this was about. It was a shorter series, but I put a lot of care into lighting and really expressing how I felt being inside in quarantine. This last image was after the Monday after a pretty intense protest. And the question was, where will you be tomorrow? And I think that's something for us to all consider as last summer becomes smaller and smaller. To give you a little preview of my work with Woke Beauty and to explain sort of where it comes from, I think there's a big burden on Black artists to progress social justice. And while that's important, I think it's further important for us to storytell and for us to have autonomy over the stories that we tell. And so, you know, through that cause, I really do my best to give space in the same way that I claimed it myself to Black women to enjoy space in front of the lens, not as commodities, not as the objectified, but rather as people who are telling a rite of passage, who are claiming a part of their lives that they want to really portray and paint in a way that's really more about legacy. And so I work to create images that can really stand the test of time, that can leave a marker in people's lives. I think it's really important to have space that feels liberating and that feels freeing. And so it really becomes a creative collaboration, and it becomes not just about the way someone looks, but about what they want to convey, what they want to hold on to. A lot of these images were last summer, were last fall, when a lot of us were inside, and Black interiority, Black imagination became really important. I was really considering identity and introspection. And so with that being said, I'm trying to move through these quickly because I want to make sure Cindy and Moyo have ample time to speak. But I do want you to know that I really do my best, you might see in these images, to really capture the subject in their own essence. So I don't use like a bunch of presets. Every image, every series is really based on the women that I work with. And almost all these people are clients. And I think that exchange is also really important. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. And I will pass the baton to Cindy, I think.
Thank you, Riley. I'll do a little intro for Cindy, just to kind of get us started. So, okay. Our second speaker tonight is Cindy Elizabeth. Cindy was born and raised on the historic east side of Austin, Texas, and graduated from Baylor University in 2010. She works with local organizations to document the stories of marginalized communities and bring light to the impact of gentrification on her own community. Utilizing the mediums of photography, film, and mixed media to explore concepts of culture, history, and symbolism, her work brings visibility to Black joy, community, and perseverance in the face of hardship. Elizabeth's work has been showcased at the George Washington Carver Museum, ICOSA Gallery, Women in Their Work Gallery, and the University of Texas at Austin. So Cindy, thank you so much, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Claire. Happy to be here. I was talking to my partner earlier about how when Kwame Brathwaite's book came out, or when it was first announced, like I immediately pre-ordered it. And so this feels like a full circle moment. So I'm very happy to be here. And also I want to say thank you to my panelists for being here and to everyone in the audience for being here. I am going to turn my video off to save bandwidth. Internet upgrade needs to happen soon. But for now, let me turn my video off and share. Okay. All right. So I am going to try to quickly give an overview of my work and of my process, and give Moyo some time. So first, I want to start by saying I am a native Austinite from East Austin, born and raised on the historical east side of Austin. And I grew up around imagery in my home that kind of reflected back to me and my siblings Blackness and the beauty in Blackness, the importance of representation, and having that constant imagery around did a lot to fuel me in my practice as well, and in my beliefs as a child, as a youth as well. So my parents, as I said, they were huge influences in my art and behind me becoming a photographer. Their walls were covered from corner to corner with photos, no spaces. It was like a mural of pictures in both homes. They had pictures of family, friends, fellow church members, everything that happened, they had to document. Even my father would have photos of Black people on his wall that he didn't even know. And I'm not talking famous Black people, I'm talking people that a friend or a family member may know, and they had a photo, and now the photo's on his wall. And so that imagery of Blackness and Black people was something that they cherished and they valued. And I believe because they didn't see a lot of it out in the world, that they made sure that their homes were a testimony to Blackness and to the beauty of it, and to the resilience and the power of it. And so that's where I picked that up from. And so when I was in middle school, this is a photo from middle school, I, for the first time, found myself in a position where the majority of the people that I was around did not look like me. So a lot of, where a few of us kids from the East Side were bused all the way over to schools like Lamar, where there wasn't a lot of representation, not only in the student body, but in the staff as well. And so a result of that meant that a lot of us went from being in environments where we felt seen and valued to being in a place where we felt almost invisible and not really cared for by other students, by our peers, and by teachers and staff and administration as well. And so it felt kind of isolating, and it really affected the way that I received love and community, but not only that, it affected the way that I understand or think about the significance of community. And so as a way to kind of counter those feelings, and sometimes we'd even feel like, in addition to feeling isolated, we would feel as though we were being treated as a threat. Like our vibrance and our happiness were seen as a threat in that environment. And so my way to counter those things were to begin to take images of us and begin to take images of our joy and our happiness, because through all of those bad experiences, we still somehow experienced a whole lot of joy and a whole lot of happiness by building our own community within this larger community. And so here in this photo is a picture of us before we were going on an eighth grade field trip. We coordinated our outfits, and we were all agreed to wear bandanas to kind of bring us together as our own unit of Black girls within this larger student body. And Kwame considered himself to be the keeper of the images for the African Jazz and Art Society and the Grandasa models. And I myself became that in middle school and in high school, because I felt like it was important to be represented, and it was important to be remembered, and it was important to remember that happiness in that joy in those moments. And so even in middle school, I was documenting my community as a form of resistance. And this is an old photo that I wanted to include that I took in middle school or high school, I believe. This may have been in high school. I took this at Highland Mall, which is now ACC Highland. This was during Texas Relay weekends in the early to mid 2000s. And so I have a ton of images like this. I just took photos wherever I went with my friends, in school, at the mall, out and about. I was the one who always had the camera. I was the keeper of the images. And so this was my entryway the need to feel represented and remembered. And I document my community because it's important, because our existence alone is a form of resistance. And so my approach, fast forwarding to 2015, to current times, my approach, carrying on from when I was a child, is one that strives to represent communities, my community, authentically, and to honor people as they are, and finding the value in what that authenticity is. And so it's a very collaborative approach, where I want to give people as much power over their image as I give to it, with the camera. And so my images are a true reflection of who my community is. And my approach is like to find out what people love about themselves or what they take pride in. And I try to find these things out sometimes in mere seconds, so that's something that we can both hone in on. And I've taken photos around East Austin over the years, in places where the historic community gathers. It has been gathering for generations. And though East Austin is being gentrified, I think, there still are spaces where the people still come together, as we have been doing. And I think it's important to document these spaces and to document the time that we spend together and the culture that we bring to these places, so that it can forever be remembered. And also to make the statement that we're still here. And I think that's also important, because one way to erase a people is to erase the history and to act as if it is no more. But these images are to say that the culture is still here, we're still here. And because we're still here, we deserve the same amount of respect, humanity, dignity. We deserve to live. And we deserve to live as freely as anybody else does. And so I shoot in both color and black and white. Sometimes the decision is limited to if I'm shooting on film, right? So sometimes I'll have black and white film, or sometimes I'll have color film. When I shoot on digital, I will make the conscious effort in post to decide if I want an image to be color or black and white. And with color, I think it's important when I think of my community, because we are a vibrant people, like our clothing, our hair, our style, like our energy, our attitudes, everything is so vibrant, and black and white would not do justice to that. And so when I decide to either shoot in color or to keep the images in color and not convert to black and white, that is what I want to come through, is that the vibrancy of the community, the vibrancy of the individual. And black and white, when I shoot in black and white, or when I decide to convert my images to black and white, it's more of sometimes it's a creative choice, because I want to draw the viewer's attention into the person who's being photographed, right? And that can mean there may be a lot going on in the background, or it could just be because there are certain patterns and shapes and forms that are present that I really want to draw the viewer's attention to. These are some images from the last Juneteenth parade here. And I love documenting, like I said, I love documenting joy. I love documenting celebration. And Juneteenth parades are some of the most joyous times for me as someone who grew up in East Austin to see. It's one of the times where you really get to see your community just shine and be celebrated, and you really feel happy to be in East Austin. And to be in community with others. And so my community is, in addition to the historic East Austin community, is the queer community. It is women of color, Black women and girls. And these images are of folks that I grew up with, either I grew up with or I met in my adulthood, that have really had an impact on me, who are doing really great things in the East Austin community and beyond, and whose activism go unnoticed by larger media and larger community. So I'm gonna speed through the rest of these. I think I'm taking up too much time. Black cowgirls in East Austin are also my community. I believe that's it. Okay. So I'm just gonna stop here, and if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cindy. That was fantastic. And now I'll introduce our final panelist. Moyo Oyalola is a photographer, multimedia artist, and activist. He creates intimate, real interactions with his subjects and communities and synthesizes that into deep, universal activations expressed in multimedia, photography, environmental installations, and public art projects. Born in Nigeria, Moyo moved to Austin when he was 7. Having grown up as the product of two worlds has shaped his thinking and work, which reflect the perspectives of both Pan-Africanism and the modern Western world. Moyo's work has been featured in brand films, advertising, editorial, music videos, environmental installations, personal projects, and an evolving number of public art projects. So welcome, Moyo. Thank you. And take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to the panelists as well. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. I know we just got some rain showers, this tropical storm ran, but yeah, it's good to be here, and it's good to get a chance to speak, in honor of the current exhibit, Black is Beautiful. Been a big fan of Kwame Brathwaite's work for a little bit, and I think I've learned more about him over the years, and it feels great to have proximity in this instance to the work, and to reflect my work around it. And I think for me, the biggest thing for me is just, I'm just in a renaissance and I am playing. That's what my work really kind of stems from, is just like, there's a quote, and I'll go ahead and share my screen as I kind of go through my work. 1 second. So there's this quote that says, "The creative adult is the child would survive," and I sincerely believe in that. And I think over the years, as we all grow up, we kind of tussle between the realities of the world and whatnot. But I do believe in just like innocence and the ability to be a bit foolish as we ask questions and question things about the world. And then I think one of the earliest times and I started learning what it means to truly play was through a body of work that I collaborate with another fellow photographer by the name of Hakeem Adewumi. It's called Distant Relatives, where him and I recognized that we had a lot of similarities in our work, and sitting together, we started exploring notions of Pan-Africanism and the diaspora as a whole. And the specific conversation we were having here was around the notions of home and what is home and where is home. As someone that grew up, I was born in Nigeria, but I've spent exactly 25 years as of last week in the United States. I truly am a product of two worlds. So I'm always kind of wrestling between where I'm from, who I come from, and then, ultimately, who do I become, right? And through all that. And so that's been a very important byline for me. And then this project really evolved from home. I'm sorry, from migration to home and then community, which is kind of like the circular pattern that you follow whenever you're moving to a place, you establish some kind of like home, a base, and then beyond that, then you look at like friends, community, and institutions to work with. So that's been kind of like my journey and my path. And a lot of my work, like such as this one, where I'm just spending an afternoon with friends playing. These are all people from the diaspora, from Senegal, from Cameroon, and Nigeria and whatnot. And we're having a conversation around soccer, which is a very global sport and whatnot. And I think it's an experience that we're all familiar with, being from Africa in general. But where we're having fun, and I'm just kind of looking through threads in the storyline of like the things that connect us, right? A moment when a team misses the ball, or a moment where a team scores, right? And you can even, if anyone was watching the Euros this last weekend, you had a thing where these young Black players that were playing for England missed the penalty shot, and then all the racial abuse and things that come with it. And so things like that just really makes me think about the Black experience globally. And then from there, a lot of my photography, it's all over. It's black and white, it's color, it's playing with lights, it's playing with moments, it's just spending time with friends. It's really kind of like a form of therapy, where a lot of this is just like, hey, let's just hang out, let's go take photos. And through it, we're engaging and conversing, and we're talking about things, and then there's just moments that are being captured. So that's kind of how I like to work, is just through like this natural flow. There might be some general idea or something I'm testing, whether it's because I want to shoot on film. The right two images are on film versus the left one is on digital. But to me, it's just like a constant act of play. And sometimes there's a notion that I'm working through and whatnot. And for instance, on the very right one, that was probably in the wake of like George Floyd and things like that, where Tiff and I were talking, we just kind of talking about like more people were, hitting her up, and even hitting me up, whatever, to talk about certain racial things and whatnot. And it was just kind of exhaustive. And so the gaze is kind of representative of like, I'm tired of all these text messages about like, oh, I feel so bad for that this is happening. It's like, well, it's been happening and whatnot. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of working through when I'm sitting with friends for photography. And a lot of times too, I'm just playing. A lot of it's about physicality of like my body, whether it's jumping or floating or suspending, and just kind of this act of feeling effortless, and seeking that through like day-to-day things and whatnot, and playing with space and playing with shadows, playing with lighting, and exploratory. And the thing about this too, it shows up in the commercial work that I do. So once again, with this being a renaissance, I'm constantly just in the lab, just working and exploring, and then translating that down the road when the opportunities arises. And as time goes on, you end up becoming in front of the camera, and once again, lighting and shadows and things like that. And sometimes not showing my whole face or holding back is kind of that product. And I think Riley talked about it in terms of like, Black subjects or whatever, offering themselves up for commercial uses or something like that. And I think those are things that we're always, as photographers, we're always conscious of whenever brands approach us to say they want to work with us or have us photograph bodies of work. And then on the right side, a lot of my work is just woodworking, creative working, whatever, it's tangible. And that's been my nature from the beginning as well. I feel like for me, I try to create Lego pieces, and then pull them all together, and then just stay true to the story. So a lot of times I don't know if it's going to be a black and white photo, and I don't know if it's even going to be a photo, right? Maybe it's going to be a video, or it's going to be, it's an installation or experimenting with food and things like that. So quite often what I'm doing through my creative process, I spend so much more time listening. And then from the listening perspective is where I start to arrive at possible solutions, that, often, yes, photography is a part of it. But I think over time, one of the things that's really helped me just hone in on my language and through photography is just working within the community, to what, alluding to what Cindy was talking about. I'm not from East Austin and whatnot. So but there's a lot of reverence that I have for the community and what goes on there. And these photos are from an activation on the east side at Givens Park, at Givens Pool, where Cindy also did a installation of flags outside. And I think this was a very vital moment for me where I was feeling a lot of angst about Austin, and about like whether I wanted to be here or not, but realizing that there's a wealth of stories that exist here, and there's a role that I had in documenting and preserving the culture. And more so specifically in East Austin, even though I'm not from East Austin, but taking time to understand how things came to be has been important for me. So that was like one of the most monumental summers for me. And then I think through that, I started leaning into more community-based projects. And this is a project at the Carver Museum called Presence, and deals with the evolution of the African-American families and how they came to settle in East Austin through the years. And so in the installation on the left that we created, one, it's holding historical photos and archival photos, but we created this wood installation pieces that kind of documents the journey of people from West Africa to the Caribbean to the Americas, while also containing in this kind of ship-like vessel images of African Americans in the United States. As you can see on the right, just kind of takes you through the walkthrough of the exhibit itself. I highly recommend you take a chance to visit if you haven't. And the evolution of my work kind of as then lent itself to a project we do that I started with 3 other people here in Austin called Open Chair, where we've taken time to just document other people that are doing the work of preserving stories, and through audio, video, and photography and written text, and even illustration. Last summer, I guess, we spent about 2 months or so going to just 2 neighborhoods. One is College Heights, and the other one is just south of Chicone. So one was a predominantly Black neighborhood and one a Hispanic neighborhood. And Open Chair just kind of allows us to create this conversation by using a chair as a vehicle to invite the community to take a seat at the table and have a presence and to amplify stories and whatnot. So yeah, that's just kind of like a glimpse at the body of work. It's rightfully all over the place because I'm just like a child with Lego pieces. Every day is different, and that's what I strive for. And I'll hand it back to Claire.
Thank you, Moyo. And thank you to Riley and Cindy as well for sharing your work with us. I think, the audience reaction, as you can see in the chat, is very effusive. So thank you all for your really thoughtful presentations of your work. I wanted to kind of kick off our conversation, and then we'll open things up to audience questions. We did have a couple of questions that came in before the panel, and I'll start with one of them, which concerned kind of the issue of the passive consumption of imagery in social media versus its possibilities for activism. And so when, each of you post your images on Instagram, and I'm wondering, when you do that, how are you thinking about it being received? How are you thinking about its impact? What opportunities does Instagram maybe afford, or, but also kind of what are the drawbacks of working within Instagram?
I can take this one. So actually, I think Instagram has been a huge resource for me. I think it's a huge reason why I've evolved, and not necessarily because of necessarily the system in which Instagram lives, but because it's allowed me to share my work on a universal platform that's available to millions of people. We've seen this through the pandemic, the fact that we can have this conversation, even though we're all in different places, and involve people who are all in different places is really powerful. And so I think the act of sharing is more what it's about than Instagram itself. But as far as like looking at the audience and looking at how people perceive imagery, I always say that like pixels hold power, but words take them further. And so for me, like the picture is more of a sort of piece of seduction for people to actually read what I have to say. And so my personal Instagram is mostly myself. And I just use my face as a vehicle because I know it'll perform 30% better than a graphic. Not just that, I'm not that cynical, but I think like there's this really beautiful kind of unity and blend between words and imagery. And if we look at like the history of Black people and the fact that we've been prohibited from writing, prohibited from documenting, from Jim Crow to modern day, education, I think that like there's almost like a responsibility I feel to storytell. And so Instagram kind of gives me leverage to do that. So it's a resource, it's a tool and nothing more. Like Instagram doesn't own me. It's run by a third-party platform. I just use it. And I've been lucky that it's, afforded me community. I think maybe Moyo in part, we connected through Instagram. Cindy, I know we connected on a panel. Who knows how many people, if anything, have been reminded or introduced through the platform. So I think there is a way to look at it in a positive light. And I do my best to kind of lean into that.
Yeah, I would add to that it's also a way to really control what you want to put out into the world and to maintain your ownership of it. Though there's two sides to that ownership coin, because one thing that I have ran into in spite of the joy of really being able to connect with other people and to be able to put out your work into the world, right? Instagram as a vehicle to be able to do that. When there's no other way for you to do it, you can use Instagram. If there's nowhere else for you to showcase your work, you can do that on Instagram. But the other side of that is that with technology, though you can't, press and hold on an image in Instagram, there's third-party technology that others use to where they can share your images, they can strip away your copyright, they can strip away like just your ownership. And this has happened to me before. Instagram thankfully was on it like really quickly when it did happen. But a lot of times, like you can become on social media, you can become separated from your work in a large amount of ways. And we have see currently with the TikTok boycott of Black creators, where it just was constant, where they their identities were being completely separated from the culture and the trends that they themselves had been created. And you had white bodies being the representation of the labor of Black TikTok in the media, on TV, and so forth. And so another thing with Instagram is that I am very careful with what I put on there, with how I curate it. There are some things that are very dear to me that I probably won't put on there. There's some work that I'll put on there, and then there's some work that I won't put on there because of issues around intellectual property. Is this something I don't know who all is looking at my work, and if there's something a project that's really special to me and that that is of my community, I don't want someone who is not part of the community to think or to kind of steal that. I don't know, they themselves go in, replicate what I'm doing, and then it becomes theirs. And so there are all of these issues, all of these things that I'm constantly thinking about as a Black creative, as a Black artist that unfortunately have impacted Black artists and creators forever. It's just really maintaining your ownership and your autonomy over your own work and your ideas.
Yeah. I think everyone probably has a love and hate relationship with Instagram as time evolved. And I think I do, but I'm learning to understand how I need to use it or why I need to use it, or even if I need to use it. And with Instagram, you're always sending out a signal to the world, right? And sometimes you're sending that signal to brands, you're sending that signal to communities, you're sending out to people, to other people. And if it's bodies of Black work, you know, there's a consciousness you have to have whether or not you're prolonging a gaze of Black subjects for audiences that like don't really even understand what it means, even though they're liking it or engaging with it or giving you comments. And so there's like a double-edged sword to it too as well. And to Cindy's point, there's a lot of work, and I think I have probably even way more work that I don't post on there, because to me, it's not even meant for that platform. It's meant for maybe like a space like this, like you physically have to come in, let's talk and let's engage with it, and then like you're in proximity to me. Like I get more excited about physical space, and I know that like Instagram allows you to kind of like maybe create a flyer or something that leads people to that larger thing. I get more excited about physical space and people being in a room together because that's tangible, that's real. Moments, it becomes a net new moment. And I feel like sometimes it's hard to have net new moments on Instagram. Although for me, it's been an incredible platform of keeping in touch of people from across the world, exploring what other people are doing, and just having some sense of like what's happening. But as more and more as time kind of comes, I'm just kind of there, just like browse, you know, then like to post.
Thanks. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear all of you talk about kind of your thought process in posting, that it's not, you know, that there are things you hold back, that there are, you know, ways in which you're conscious of kind of the advantages and the pitfalls of social media, you know, and just in kind of looking at the Brathwaite show, you know, I kind of was thinking like, if he'd had Instagram, he totally would have used it, you know, because there's this idea of, you know, getting your images out as far as possible. And of course, Kwame S. Brathwaite, you know, is very active in kind of posting his father's work on Instagram. So it's interesting to hear from all of you about kind of the way in which you're engaging, you know, critically with the medium. Another thing I thought all of you sort of touched on, but maybe we can get into just a little more specifically before we start answering audience questions, is the technical aspects and the challenges of photographing darker skin tones. You know, photo historically, you know, there have been, you know, exclusionary practices within photography, especially in the development of Black and white photography and the representation of darker skin tones. I know, Riley, this is something you and I talked a little bit about in color photography as well, but just from kind of a technical aspect for any other, you know, photographers in the audience, what are some of the challenges that you face, you know, still kind of technically?
I want to start by saying, I'm really not going to say much about that because I don't personally feel like there are any challenges. What I want to say is that technology is racist. Even the Zoom that we're on, cameras are no different. No form of technology is no different. The way that technology has been developed to recognize certain skin tones over others, and then the way that we're trained to be able to light for certain skin tones over others. So that's all I will say on that. But technology is racist.
Yeah.
I guess I'll speak to it briefly. I'm kind of with Cindy on this. I don't know if it's up to us to explain how to photograph Black skin. I think, yeah, in essence, the camera is not one for equity. It wasn't built that way. It wasn't built by us. You look at the history of Kodak, film was not made for us. And then you look at post-production, even today, when I do work in front of the lens and I get pictures back of my skin orange, like it's just not even the right hue. We've seen that on the cover of Vogue. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I think it's more so important to call it out and to say that there needs to be more intentionality around how we make cameras, how we build lenses, how we produce, how we curate, how we edit. I've stood in front of the lens and been told to get out because the person didn't know how to expose for me and the white person, right? So it's not geared or shifted for us. We're like the exception. And I think what should be exceptional is not even considered. And so that is, that's my soapbox.
Yeah, I'll third that, and I think I'll also add it's also in the film world too as well, of whether or not the gaffers know how to light for Black skin and darker hues. So it shows up there, which also means certain actresses or actors are not getting certain gigs or whatnot, or someone of a lighter complexion gets chosen over that. So and I don't think there's necessarily a challenge. I think for all of us, I think we because I think we spend so much time shooting Black subjects, darker subjects. We know how to, like, we actually embrace that. Like, I think it's just beautiful, and like Black, it absorbs light, which is also just really, really beautiful. And when you're having that in context to maybe fashion and everything else is going on, it's just one beautiful composition. And I think we lean into it a lot. And I think part of, to Riley's point about post-production, is just knowing what the skin should look like and knowing how to like properly compensate for that becomes a whole thing. So I would encourage, younger creatives or photographers to really think about that as they're producing work, of like keeping that, staying true to that in form becomes important, and not feeling like you have to deviate to what, some fashion editorial standard might be.
Great, thank you. We'll take questions from the audience. We have 4 that I can see here. The first is from Tammy Jackson for Cindy. Cindy, can you please talk about the importance of class diversity in your work? I love the representation so much and love how you capture Black joy.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that compliment, Tammy. Class representation, I guess, I don't even really think about it that way, but, essentially, like, where I come from poverty. I come from, the hood, so to speak. I come from the culture where within Blackness, right? Because Blackness is not a monolith. And so you can see it in our work that, there's lots of variation in the things that we photograph and the people, though Black, like there's so much representation even within the Black community. And my community is a community where a lot of the same things that are stolen are also the things that we're kind of punished for. We're punished for being very vibrant. We're punished for being loud. We're punished for being happy and laughing and just louder than than anyone else. We're punished for our expressiveness, while that expressiveness is kind of packaged up and sold elsewhere and completely stripped of the ownership. And so for me, it's important to document that. Like, it's important to be like, have ownership over our image and over our culture and over and so I think that is also like a part of my work that is really important to me. Thank you for that question.
Our second question, I think, might also be for you, Cindy, from Steph Beasley. What types of conversations do you have with your subjects before photographing them, if at all, or are they already familiar with your work?
It depends. Some are, and some aren't. But always, when I photograph people, I find something that we can connect on. I try to connect with them on who they are before trying to put my own spin on it or my own imagination on it or whatever biases that I may have. And so the conversations I have can be, I like your dress. Where are you from? How long have you lived in East Austin? I'm from here as well, and just connecting on those levels. Always, finding something interesting about them and hearing, their reactions and their thoughts on it, and just really just trying to connect on a human level and not approach them as an opportunity.
I'd love to speak on this briefly. just because I didn't in my presentation. Every single session that I offer is not without some form of consultation. And I discovered this in college, that when I photograph strangers without speaking to them versus sitting down with someone for an hour or so and having an intimate conversation, there was some kind of different transcendental moment that shifted in the photograph. And so while, you know, like Gary Winogrand was one of my favorite photographers, I absolutely love Cindy's work. I found that sitting down slowly with someone was important for the portraiture that I wanted to create. And so with that said, I do think that there's something that happens, and I'm sure Cindy would agree, when you have a moment with someone that's not just with your camera in hand. The camera can be a very aggressive tool. We all know about the gaze. And so when you can break that down and make it more about your human connection, there is something that changes in a person as a subject. And so that is quintessential to my work. I think photography is really honestly like maybe the third act in what I do. And I think like in every medium, in every space in the world, it's so important for us to have this. And so, yeah, I think anyone can kind of take that into their own work.
Yeah, and you've alluded, Riley, to your use of, the caption feature in Instagram. That's something I've noticed so often in your work, is these great, narratives that accompany the images that talk about these kind of off-camera interactions that you've had with the people who are sitting for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I'll just add, because I know there was a question about where the pictures are taken. You're free to like message me after this, because I know we're kind of close on time, but I have like a long list of various spaces around Austin that don't necessarily look like Austin, at least not through my eye. And I think that it's really cool to be able to make a city kind of look universal. So happy to take that off screen if you want to shoot me a message.
That's great. We had another question about representation. This, of course, was something that all of you used in your presentations, and that comes through a lot in Brathwaite's work as well. And that was kind of part of why I wanted to pull the three of you in, because there are these kind of through lines between your work and his in talking about community, beauty, Pan-Africanism, kind of there are all these connections that you can make, and representation obviously is central to his work as well. So the question is, all of your work manages to represent things like yourselves, culture, your communities versus gentrification in ways that feel authentic and not voyeuristic. What is your process to achieve this? Is it something you learned over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what the other question was referencing. It's just like the conversation. It's people you're in relationship with. So it's not, once again, to Cindy's word, an opportunity. It's relationship that you're building with people, and the active listening. And that's how you're really truly able to find this thread, because of like people, their joy, their happiness, whether they're rich, they're poor, whatever, you find like a common thread, and you start to tie them together. And I think that's been a part of what's helped me. And I think as time goes on, you definitely then hone in on that, right? Because I think maybe if we're talking in context of maybe Instagram, you're like, oh, I really want to like replicate this image because it's going to be cool, or it's going to be an aesthetic or something like that. And then you're like, well, that doesn't have a soul, right? That's just an image, versus the ability to get people to be comfortable to show up as themselves, and then you show up as yourself. So the opportunity becomes really, really positive. And then the themes, then you start to look for themes that you really start to care about. I think that's what's been for me. And some of those themes have just been leaning into my truth, right? As somebody that's a product of America and Nigeria. And then it's like me asking that question, and then it's asking people that question too. And so that then translates into some kind of art form as time goes on.
I'm so excited for this question because Temi asked it. Hey, Temi. And I just worked with them for a few months through the Carbon Museum, and in part learned my answer to this question through them. So it's kind of neat how full circle this will be. But I think storytelling is not just about pouring outwards, it's about pouring inwards. And that is where the question of Instagram, that is where Kwame Brathwaite's work comes into play, because, it's not just performative. It is not just about representation. It is about the self. It's about self-actualization. It's about self-representation. And we see that in Moyo's work. He talked about his story. Cindy's work, she talked about her story, right? And so there is us woven in through our work, even if we are photographing other people. And that is where like the pure, unique representation lies. There's no one like Cindy, there's no one like Moyo, there's no one like me, you know? And so I think, you know, the more we become aware of the world around us, the better people will be. And I think that that is like kind of at the focal point of all this work. So to kind of wrap that up in a bow, I think, you know, it's really important to recognize that Black people are people. You know, it's not just about being Black. It's very important. It's a huge part of who we are. But to be able to elevate other entities of ourselves, including our art, is really important. And that's where representation goes so much further, you know, than color. So thanks, Tammy.
I just want to say I agree with everything you both said. And hey, Tammy.
Thank you all. So we're, you know, 6 minutes over time, but I think, you know, that just attests to what a great conversation we've had tonight, and how much our audience has benefited from hearing all of you. So I want to thank our panelists for being so thoughtful in presenting your own work, and in kind of thinking about a bigger picture, and in sharing it with us. So thank you all. I will get to wrap it up. So we hope that, I'm going to say we have one more program related to this exhibition. If you're excited about the Brathwaite show, please save the date for our upcoming panel featuring UT faculty members contextualizing Brathwaite's work. We're excited to be partnering with the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the University of Texas at Austin's LBJ School of Public Affairs on this event, which will be held on September 7th. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But before that, we have next month's curated conversation, which is something a little different. We're holding an exclusive virtual screening of When a Priest Marries a Witch, an artist lecture by Suzanne Bocanegra starring Paul Lazar. And Suzanne Bocanegra will be joining me for a live Q&A following that screening. For more details on our programs, visit blantonmuseum.org/museum from home. If you'd like to show your support, you can become a member or give the gift of membership at blantonmuseum.org/membership. If you want to always be in the know about programs like this and other news, sign up for our newsletter at blantonmuseum.org/subscribe. And as a reminder, all of our public programs, including this one, are recorded and shared on the Blanton YouTube channel, and you can find them there about a week after the program originally airs. And finally, if you've enjoyed this program, please feel free to donate at blantonmuseum.org/paywhatyowish. And again, thank you to our panelists, thank you to the audience, and we hope to see you all next month. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.